When you're getting ready for a dye project, there's one really important measurement that you want to make at the very beginning. This measurement I'm talking about is the weight of your fabric that you're planning to dye. Finding the weight of our fabric allows us to determine how much mordant we need and also how much dye stuffs. And it allows us to be more precise with the use of our materials so that we're not wasteful. This is where the kitchen scale comes in really handy. Now, I recommend measuring in grams because they're precise and it's easy to calculate percentages. So when you're working with cotton, typically if you're using an alum mordant, the alum is going to be 10% of the weight of the fabric. So let's walk through that, and don't let it scare you if you're not into math. It's not hard. I'm set up here with my scale and some bowls to measure things into, my alum, a notebook so I can make note of my measurements, and then the items that I would like to dye. Now, I have several things here, and I'm going to measure them all separately because even though I might be mordanting them all together, I may decide to put them into different dye baths, at which point I want to know the individual weights. So I'll start with these shoelaces, and they're small enough to fit on the scale. So after I've turned it on and I see that it's at 0 and it also is in grams, I can go ahead and just jot that down. So I have round shoelaces at 11 grams. And then I'll proceed to the next. You always want to make sure it's at 0 before you move to the next item. So when you're working with something bigger, sometimes you'll need to place it in a container just to keep everything on top of the scale. So if I take this yardage here, I don't want it falling off the ends, right? Because then I haven't measured it. So I'll put it in this bowl. I'm going to set my scale to 0, check for grams, and then go ahead and place this. So I have 169 grams for the broadcloth. My shirt, and some muslin. When it comes time to measure the alum is going to be 10% of the weight that I wrote right here. And an easy way to figure that out is to just move, if you imagine there's a decimal after the 12, just move that decimal over one place and you have 10%. So if my shirt is 12 grams, then the alum is going to be 1.2 grams. Now, that's getting a little overly precise, and this scale is not going to measure 0.2 grams. So I'll just round it down to 1 gram, and then I'm good to go. So I'm just going to work my way through here. I'm going to round this up to 3 grams. Let's see, 17 grams, 1 gram, and 1 gram. Now, if I'm mordanting these all together, I can just add them up, and that will be the amount of alum I need for this batch. So I have 23 grams that I need for my alum. So I can set this on my scale and set it to 0. And just spoon this in until I reach the required amount. Okay, and then I can just set this aside until my hot water is ready, and then I'll go ahead and dissolve it, and I can mordant my fabric. If you're just getting started with natural dyeing and you don't have a kitchen scale, don't despair. You can use teaspoon and tablespoon measurements. In my ebook, Natural Dyes from the Orchard, I do have a chart which describes several types of clothing blanks you might want to dye, the approximate measurement in grams, how many grams of alum that would be, and then how that converts into teaspoons and tablespoons. There's only so much mordant that a fabric will take up. So if you're putting more mordant in than the fabric can absorb, then in the end, you're just pouring the excess down the drain. And it's more effluent than needs to go into the environment. And it's also, a waste of resources. In the long run, as you start doing more and more dyeing, it just makes a lot of sense to be more efficient with your materials. If you weren't interested in using a scale to measure your fabric and ingredients before, I hope that this might convince you. I have never regretted having measurements, but I have often regretted not having them. And especially if you want to start keeping track of what you're doing so that you can get consistent results from one dye project to another, you're going to want those numbers.